Yeah, hi folks. Yes, Chris Hipkins is Ardern 2.0, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I've heard people compare the Hawke's Bay flood to the Christchurch earthquake, and they simply cannot be compared. Now, while the Hawke's Bay flood was horrific, the 11 deaths there simply cannot be compared to the 185 in Christchurch. But what really pees me off is this. While Ardern is wasting millions on separatist nonsense and gallivanting around the world and other woke stupidity like that, the Hawke's Bay flood could have been prevented. Now, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council have been warning about this for years. I recorded this yesterday. Much of the settled Hawke's Bay region is low-lying and built on river flood plains. This brings the risk of flooding, which is our most common natural hazard. A severe storm or flood happens every 10 years on average. Major storms affect wide areas and can be accompanied by strong winds, heavy rain or snowfall, thunder, lightning and rough seas. They can cause damage to property and infrastructure, affect crops and livestock, disrupt essential services and cause coastal inundation. Rivers normally flood every winter when a storm brings more rainwater than can soak into the soil. When floods threaten communities, the flood becomes a hazard. In Hawke's Bay, stop banks have been built alongside many of the rivers to hold in the extra floodwater. However, in a severe storm, rivers could breach stop banks and the flood waters may go through farms, homes, shops, schools and damage roads and other infrastructure. And now to Chippy and how he and the Labour Party plan to milk the Hawke's Bay tragedy.
I am hoping to get back to Wellington later on today, where I'll get a briefing from the team at NEMA, who have now stood up the full national emergency response. We'll then be able to provide a fuller update, including some of the facts and figures that I know people will be looking for later on today and potentially early this evening. People will be aware that a national state of emergency has been declared.
Now, does that sound familiar?
Today, a state of national emergency has been declared across New Zealand. Through the early and hard measures we've taken at the border using the powers under the Health Act, the signing of epidemic notices and now being in a state of national emergency, we have all of the legislative means possible, all of the enforcement powers, all the tools we need at our disposal to combat the spread of COVID-19. In particular, the State of National Emergency Declaration allows civil defence emergency management controllers to take the necessary steps, if they need to ensure the conservation and supply of food, fuel and other essential supplies, regulate land, water and air traffic, close roads and public places, evacuate any premises including any public place, and if necessary to exclude people or vehicles from any premises or place.
And as we all know, anyone who challenged Ardern and the COVID narrative was silenced globally. And what else does she want to censor?
This will also be important in understanding more about mis and disinformation online, a challenge that we must as leaders address. Sadly, I think it's easy to dismiss this problem as one in the margins. I can certainly understand the desire to leave it to someone else. As leaders, we're rightly concerned that even the most light-touch approaches to disinformation could be misinterpreted as being hostile to the values of free speech that we value so highly. But while I cannot tell you today what the answer is to this challenge, I can say with complete certainty that we cannot ignore it. To do so poses an equal threat to the norms we all value. After all, how do you successfully end a war if people are led to believe the reason for its existence is not only legal but noble? How do you tackle climate change if people do not believe it exists?
How do you tackle climate change if people do not believe it exists? So she clearly wants to silence people who oppose the climate agenda. And Chippy wants exactly the same. You've just got to listen to his words.
Is this climate change?
Well, it's a 1 in 100 year weather event, and we seem to be getting a lot of them at the moment. And I think people can see that, there's a message in that.
Do you think it's climate change?
Yes.
And in that regard, the National Party has probably pushed back a bit. The Labour Party has traditionally tried to push through legislation that would assist with climate change, and you've met some resistance to this. What do you think politically the message will need to be in order to convince voters that climate change is a real issue that, in particular, Aucklanders, I guess, but also other people around the country who may face natural disasters in the future will have to look at?
Look, I think there'll be plenty of time for the politics around this after we've got through this emergency response phase. I don't want to get into the politics of that at the moment. Climate change is real. It's with us. It's having an impact on our weather. We are seeing more of these extreme weather events. We're going to have to deal with more of these extreme weather events in the near future. We need to be prepared for that. And we need to do everything that we can to combat the challenge of climate change. But
we need to do everything we can to combat the challenge of climate change. His words, not mine. And of course, the Climate Minister couldn't resist saying this at the start of the cyclone.
And I have to say that as I stand here today, I struggle to find words to express what I'm thinking and feeling about this particular crisis. I don't think I've ever felt as sad or as angry about the lost decades that we spent bickering and arguing about whether climate change was real or not, whether it was caused by humans or not, whether it was bad or not, whether we should do something about it or not, because it is clearly here now. And if we do not act, it will get worse. I have to say, I've been recalling actually a quote from a different time about a different crisis. The era of procrastinations, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays is coming to its close. In its place, we are entering a period of consequences. And there will be people who say, just as the National Rifle Association of the United States does about shootings over there, it's too soon to talk about these things, but we are standing in it right now. This is a climate change related event. The severity of it, of course, made worse by the fact that our global temperatures have already increased by 1.1 degrees. We need to stop making excuses for inaction. We cannot put our heads in the sand when the beach is flooding.
We cannot put our heads in the sand when the beach is flooding. His words, not mine. And of course, Luxon is on the same page.
Well, look, I think as we head to the recovery phase, we've really got to be able to come together and actually say, look, this is an extreme weather event caused by climate change. Be under no illusions about that.
Now, this guy hasn't a dog show of beating Hipkins. He has no passion. Now compare Luxon's passion to Giorgia Meloni, and hat tip to Rich for this one.
We've heard the left's predictable meltdown about the new Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who they have falsely labelled far-right and a fascist. Meanwhile, the Italian press call her what she is, centre-right, and the Italian people elected her their Prime Minister in September, sensible people. Now, far from being some extremist that our mainstream media claim, Meloni is a deeply principled politician who has a habit of telling it like it is. Watch here as she explains how France continues to exploit poor African countries, which then adds to Europe's illegal immigration crisis.
Questo è un bambino che lavora in una miniera d'oro in Burkina Faso. Il Burkina Faso è una delle nazioni più povere del mondo. Per il Burkina Faso, che ha l'oro, la Francia stampa moneta coloniale. In cambio pretende che finiscano nelle casse del tesoro francese il 50% di tutto quello che il Burkina Faso esporta. L'oro che questo bambino si infila in un cunicolo per tirare fuori finisce per lo più nelle casse dello Stato francese. Allora la soluzione non è prendere gli africani e spostarli in Europa, la soluzione è liberare l'Africa da certi europei che la sfruttano e consentire a queste persone di vivere di quello che hanno.
Sweet Mary, Mother of God, that woman is magnificent. She said, the solution is not to take the Africans and bring them to Europe. The solution is to free Africa from certain Europeans who exploit it.
Yeah, now folks, Giorgia Meloni is now the most popular leader in the entire European Union. Now contrast that with Luxon, who is struggling to beat a schoolboy who got a Bachelor of Arts degree and then pretty much went straight into politics working for Helen Clark.